Well, it's happened again. For those of you who have not heard, a SpaceX launch vehicle has exploded on the pad with virtually no explanation. They were doing a test on the engines. The test seemed to go okay. They powered it down, and then kaboom. Now, I remember a couple days ago, right before I put up the video, about those two strange black dots that NASA picked up. They were talking about, trying to fill time, how involving the private sector in space exploration was going to make it safer, was going to make it more reliable. I think we can probably debunk that completely now. There's plenty of video and photographic evidence on the internet of SpaceX having events like this happen. It's just going to be the case. And before you start being so arrogant as to think you can just do this with people without risking human life, they need to go back to the drawing board. Because I tried to hint around at it in the last video. This going back to the way they did stuff in the 60s is a terrible idea. This plopping a capsule on top of a giant, basically, stick of TNT and then shooting it into the air. And then if something goes wrong, they can just eject and then just float down to the ocean. That's a really bad idea. In fact, the reason we had the space shuttle was because of all of the problems that were associated with this technique. Put something up that can operate at least basically under its own power, and then bring itself back in a controlled way. The vast majority of shuttle missions went just fine. They became so ubiquitous that they were almost boring. That's how many times they went up and how many times they came down and landed and everything was fine. But everybody was talking about Challenger and Columbia. Should some of the technology they have here be incorporated? Sure. Absolutely, they should take some things. But this idea of just leaving it up to a for-profit corporation to do this, it's going to cost lives eventually. Eventually, something's going to happen, and I'm sorry that all of the equipment and things were destroyed on the pad, but thank goodness it wasn't the two individuals that were slated to go up. Now here's an image of the aftermath right here. They're being very controlled with what they allow people to see, because they have allowed people to see things before, and some very astute folks have pointed out some things that didn't make sense. Like this one for sure. No one can explain how this is already up here when this is just beginning to explode down here. No one can explain that to this day. Same thing with this image here. I'm not sure if anyone has pointed this out yet. Now this is post-explosion, so it could be something that was down here at one point. But then this one is actually from the most recent one. This is from 5/29/2020. And as you can see, here's the explosion. But look way over here. And here. What are these? In the last video, I showed a larger black object and a smaller black object in the skies that NASA had picked up. And it was only a few minutes that I had it on video before they cut the feed. And I tried over and over again to restart that app. And they kept saying technical difficulty, and that went on for 20-25 minutes. So whatever was going on at the ISS, where, oh, by the way, they were launching for, they didn't want people to see. And now we have this event. So something very, very different than the truth is being put out. And I'm sure a lot of you are used to that by now. But this is Starship Cam. This is SpaceX.com's official cam. And even here, we can see that there's things that can't be explained. And until they can start explaining things, and this isn't the first time, I think this idea of putting men into orbit, men into space, is just ridiculous at this point. It really is. The president's desire notwithstanding, so much of what needs to be done up there can be done remotely or can also be done by computers and robots, and they've been doing it for a long time. There's very, very little that an actual human being needs to do up there to monitor and maintain that can't, like I said, be done remotely. We're not, the stuff we've sent to Mars proves this. We've sent 2 rovers the size of Volkswagens to Mars, landed them safely, and they've crawled all over the surface of Mars and sent back all sorts of images, and done so without any human needing to be there. I really don't understand it at this point, because the risk is just so great. It's one of the reasons we don't explore our deep oceans. In fact, I would make the allegation if there was money to be spent, it should be spent on the deep oceans. But once again, we have an issue there too. Because one little thing goes wrong, 5 miles underwater, it's over. You're never going to get them back. You just can't do it. And I don't mean to sound pessimistic. I'm not saying we shouldn't do anything. I'm saying the money should be spent on using advanced non-human technology to go down and look around. That would be my effort. Space is always going to be there, apparently. And I guess you could probably make that argument for our oceans as well, but until we have a good solid grasp of the planet we live on, this should be secondary. We have an entire continent, 95% of which is completely unexplored, and I know this is a Antarctica thing, but seriously, when you look back in history, somebody's going to say, wait a minute, these people were spending billions and billions of dollars trying to explore their solar system when they hadn't even explored all the continents on their planet? Think about that for a minute. What if there was a room in your house because it was upstairs, maybe it was up on the 3rd floor, and you didn't want to be bothered to go up there and look around, but you decided to go off your property and look at other people's houses when you didn't even know what was in a room in your own house? So I know these are some fairly disturbing images, but it is what it is. It is what it is, and humble opinions being what they are, I think some of the things that we might glean from exploring the oceans and exploring Antarctica might give us an edge going forward into space eventually. For example, dealing with the cold. If we can't deal with Antarctica, sure as heck aren't going to be able to deal with the cold of outer space. If they're saying it's too cold to explore Antarctica in any real concerted way, why are we bothering with space? It's far colder. Far, far colder. And at least down here we have a pressurized atmosphere. And if you can't deal with the absence of pressure in space, then perhaps you should combat that by learning to deal with excessive pressure at the bottom of the ocean. Because that's just the reverse engineered same thing. One atmosphere held safely is basically the same technology when it's preventing dozens and dozens of atmospheres from getting in, as opposed to escaping into the vacuum of space. The pressure of negative atmospheres. So I didn't want to make this a big technical discussion, but the things that are hurdles in outer space can be overcome down here on the planet. So anyway, but it's thank God the two astronauts are safe. Thank God. And I hope people can continue to answer questions and ask questions and move forward in a responsible manner. And I'll just leave it there. Like, share, subscribe.